In recent years, there's been a lot of discussion about the role of the hijab, the modern Muslim society. And they would send them back to France and sell them and spread them everywhere, and they were very popular. So that they would wake up with their intestines burning from an intense fever, and their lungs would fill with fluids, so that every breath felt like they were drowning. And they would find their mothers and their fathers and their children dying of dehydration, begging for water that could not be found.
The documentary you're about to watch is based on the book that I'm writing called The Entire History of Islam. In this book, I will not only tell you, but I will show you the entire history of this ummah. From Ibrahim alayhi salam all the way until the modern era, and from the Muslim kingdoms of Italy and Greece and China to the obsession that the Japanese elite once had with Islam and with the Muslim world. And if you pre-order the book during this Ramadan only, I will literally write your name into the book, an honor for you, so that the world will know generations from now that it was you who supported this book from the very beginning. So go to my website now and pre-order the book, and may Allah grant your name a legacy the ummah will never forget. Ameen.
In recent years, there's been a lot of discussion about the role of the hijab in the modern Muslim society. And strange questions are now being asked. Questions like, is it really required? Is it something that is a should rather than a must? Do we really need to wear the hijab as women in public? Because you're now seeing slogans on the internet, things that are saying the hijab is a choice. It's something, they're implying that it's something cultural, that it's not a requirement, that it's not necessary for the women to wear. And now, even worse, you're seeing trends of influencers trying to take off their hijab, rather showing big spectacles on the internet, making videos about undressing themselves for the world and liberating themselves, and encouraging other women to do the same. But rather than try to explain the requirement or the rulings, I want to take a look at the trend that's happening and give some context to it, give some reasons for it, give some understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. But before I do that, I need to tell you a story, but the story is a little bit adults only. So I'm going to try my best to use the most noble language, and I hope you'll forgive me. In the year 1830, the French, they began the invasion of Algeria, in one of the most brutal and violent occupations the world had ever seen. And soon they began sending their soldiers from town to town and village to village, where they would burn down the crops, and they would destroy the houses, and they would kill all of the animals and slaughter all of the sheep and livestock that they could find in an attempt to starve the Algerian people by by destroying their food supply. And from this gave way to different diseases such as typhus and cholera, things that ravaged the Algerian people, so that they would wake up with their intestines burning from an intense fever, and their lungs would fill with fluids, so that every breath felt like they were drowning. And they would find their mothers and their fathers and their children dying of dehydration, begging for water that could not be found. But the Algerians, they experienced, of course, more direct means of violence. When the French, they would come to their villages at night, and they would surround them, and they would bombard them with shellings and with mortar fire, and they would shoot into the houses that the people slept at night with their rifles, and that anyone who tried to run out into the streets to escape the fire, they were considered combatants. Whether they were men, women, or children, they were shot dead, and their bodies were left there to rot as their blood ran dry. And when the bullets and the bombs became too expensive for the lives that they were taking, the French, they would gather, they would herd the Algerian people into caves, and they would light fires at the entrances of those caves. And the smoke would come in, and it would suffocate them. In only a few decades, 1 million Algerians were killed, men, women, and children. A third of the entire Algerian population. And as for the women in particular, the mass violations that were done to the women in an attempt to destroy their dignity, to destroy their honor, to break the spirit of the Algerian people. I don't think I need to explain to you what those violations were. But these depraved acts against the women, you need to understand that they were part of a larger campaign to sexualize and to fetishize the Algerian women as part of the perverted fantasies of the French. And just so you understand how deep this was, the French military, they would bring artists and they would bring painters from France to come to paint the Algerian, paint scenes of them in the most provocative poses. And they would create poster books, and they would create different picture collections, and they would send them back to France and sell them and spread them everywhere, and they were very popular. And when the photography was invented, when the cameras were invented, they brought the cameras too, and the soldiers, what they would do to the women in the streets there, that they would pose with them and take pictures of themselves because these were their trophies of conquest. In the words of one French psychologist who went there and who visited them and who saw the crimes that the French were committing, I quote him, he says that it was the colonists' frenzy to unveil the Algerian woman. What does this mean? What he was saying is that the French people, the French army, they were obsessed with the hijab of the Algerian women. Because as they colonized and conquered their country, they found a women that were not available to them, that didn't reciprocate their advances, that covered themselves, and it was a infuriating thing. It was a humiliating thing for the French, that they were inaccessible to them. And so the hijab, it became a symbol of revolution, it became a symbol of resistance against the French, while the French, they obsessed over it, to the point where they dedicated a portion of their military budget just to spread propaganda, try to convince the Algerian women to take off their hijabs. And they would try and force them in the streets when they refused. And they would set up stages all around the country where they would coerce the women. They would force the women onto those stages so that they, in spectacles, they could reveal their hair in front of the cameras, in front of the TVs, that these images would be broadcast all around the country. And while the Algerians eventually won their freedom, and they eventually kicked out the French from their country, know that that war against the hijab, it never ended. And it still rages on today. Because the colonizer never forgot this battle. The invader never forgot this battle. And if you look next door to Quebec, to the laws that are being passed every week and the political activities that are taking place every day, you will know that the French, they never left this battle. But in all of this, I find something very strange. Because there's a small detail that I haven't told you. You see, the Algerians, they were first invaded in 1830. But the anti-hijab campaigns began in the 1930s, 100 years later. So let me ask you a question. Why did it take 100 years for the French to start attacking the hijab? Well, when you discover the answer to this question, you're going to realize that although the hijab had become a symbol of resistance in Algeria at that time, the hijab never used to be a symbol of Islam. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله ولكم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. أما بعد. A couple of years ago, I was doing research on something when I came across a very strange book written by a British professor. The name was called Aphrodite's Tortoise. And in this book, the entire book was dedicated to explaining the way, the clothing of the people of ancient Greece. And as I was going through this book, I noticed something very strange, in that in all of the pictures and the images and the displays of the women in this book, all of them had their hair covered. And this British professor, the author of this book, he admits this, and he says something very strange. He says that the way that these women were dressed in ancient Greece is almost exactly the same way that the Muslim women of today are dressed. And so I became very curious. And I'll give you some examples. When he showed different types of hijab, such as the faros and the lithma, different styles that looked exactly like the niqab. Or other styles such as the himation and the tegadion, different hijab styles in ancient Greece that looked exactly like the khimar. And so I decided to see, is this real? Is this something that only existed in ancient Greece, or did this also exist in other places, in other times? And so I went to the Roman Empire, and I saw there they had their own styles of hijab there too, that they called the palla and the cephibellum, different styles, different fashions, different colors, all for the same purpose, to cover the women's hair. But it didn't just end in the ancient world, In fact, it continued as the European nations, they adopted Christianity. Within the writings of Paul and his followers, which we call the New Testament in the Bible, you'll find verses that command the women to cover their hair, or else it is something shameful. And so in Britain, you'd find them wearing a hijab called the wimple, a white hijab that went all the way down to their chest. In the French, they would wear something called the cornet, similar, but with folded fabrics that would come out and appear like two horns. In Malta, they had the ranella, a black hood that they would wrap around their hair. And in Northern Europe, in places like Poland and places like Hungary, they had the hennin, a big cone-shaped hat in which they would put a veil on top that would drape around their hair. And this is only a few places, and a few times, and a few examples. You have so many different styles and different dresses, coifs, caps, hoods, snoods, all with the same purpose, all with the sake of covering the women's hair and protecting their beauty and preventing the gazes and the looks of foreign men. And there are still remnants of this in our culture today, but they're hidden. If you ever go to an Orthodox church, for example, a Ukrainian, Russian, Serbian, Greek church, whatever, they will make the women wear hijabs if they go into the church. The same used to apply to the Catholics until the 1980s, very recently. And now, even today, if a woman goes visits the Pope in the Vatican, she has to wear some kind of hijab. Now, sometimes they get around this by wearing a fashionable hat, but the rule still stays the same. And even in the little details, the veils that they wear, the white veils that they wear for the weddings as they walk down the aisle, that comes directly from ancient Rome, from a specific hijab that they called the flavium for special occasions. And of course you have the nuns, and you have the Amish people, and you even have the Christians in Ethiopia. You still have some of these people that still wear the hijab. And so that's why I say that perhaps the hijab wasn't a symbol of Islam, because it was something that the entire world agreed upon. And it wasn't just Europe, by the way. It was places in Africa and in India and in Asia. I've seen the hijabs that they used to wear in Peru, where it was a full niqab except for one eye. They would cover even the other. I've seen the hijabs that they wore in Korea 100 years ago, that the nobility would wear, where they would cover their faces and their hair as a sign of high class. Perhaps this is why the French, that when they invaded Algeria in 1830, they didn't attack the hijab right away, because back home, back in their own lands, their own women, they too, they were also wearing a hijab. This was the way it was 100 years ago. But oh, how in the early 1900s, how the desires of man to sexualize and to fetishize every woman they could not possess, how they created and organized a campaign of propaganda to try to convince the people of the West and later the world to take off their hijabs and to make them promiscuous and undressed. And so I say to the Muslim women here, I say to the Muslim women, I warn you of a war that is coming for you, that is already here. I warn you of a war because you are the last bastion, the last people who have kept your dignity. You are the last people who have kept your honor and your dignity, and you have not worn You have not walked in the streets naked. That you are the last people. That you are a people that the world is coming against, because they have convinced the world. They have convinced the people of Europe. They have convinced the people of Asia and of Africa and of the Americas. They have convinced the women there to be beastly, to be undressed, to be provocative. And yet you stand, the last of them, when the world used to be like you. That you are the last of the people. You are the last of the light. The last of dignity. While the entire world has failed this. And for those of you, O Muslim women, who have not yet worn a hijab, I know the monumental pressure that you face. The monumental enemy that you face, that at every corner and at every turn, they are trying to separate you from the hijab. I know the pressure that you face. But you have to understand that you are our honor. You are the honor of the ummah. You are the dignity of this community, that you are our sisters and our mothers and our daughters, and I know you, that you are a people that stand tall, that you are a people that when you finally, you decide to put it on, bi'idhnillah, that you are going to be a people that will stand tall when the rest of the world, is trying to drag you down, when the hungry, perverted, feral dogs that see women as cheap meat, to be displayed on advertisements and on posters, that when they come for you, you are a people that stand tall. I know you. And for the men here, I wish to leave you just one last story. That when the French invaded Turkey, this time, after World War I, they colonized the city by the name of Kahramanmaraş. And in that city there were 3 women. And they were exiting a bathhouse one day, a Turkish hammam, and they came together, and they were wearing their hijabs, of course, in the street, and they came across a group of French soldiers. And those soldiers, they began to grope them and harass them and try to rip off their hijab. And those women, they began to scream and shout for help. And when a young man, 17 years old, came rushing to their aid, hearing their screams, those French soldiers, they took their rifles and they shot him dead. And this started a shootout with one of the imams of the city, which devolved into an uprising which became one of the first battles of the Turkish War of Independence. The Turks today, they still commemorate this event with statues and icons because they honor the shaheed. They honor the man who died for the sake of the honor and the dignity of the women. This is a hero for the people. So I ask Allah to make the men strong to protect our women. I ask Allah to make the women strong, that they withstand the vicious dogs that are coming for them. Ameen. I ask you all to give salat salam ala Rasulillah. Allahumma izz al-Islam wal-Muslimin wa adhill al-shirka wal-mushrikeen wa dammir a'da'aka a'da' ad-din. Oh Allah, I ask of you to help our women and our children, I ask you, Allah, to help our community to withstand the attacks, the constant attacks that are coming after them. Ameen. I ask you, Allah, to make us a strong people, a leadership people, a people that are leaders for the world, so that we can return once again to something of dignity and brightness. Ameen. And I ask you, Allah, for the sake of the lives that are being destroyed in Sudan and in Gaza and all in Palestine and the rest of the world, I ask you, Allah, to help those people, to relieve them of their difficulties, and to deliver a punishment the likes of which we have never seen to those who have oppressed our innocent brothers and sisters around the world. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Inna Allah ya'mur bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi ya'idhukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Aqimus salah.
Video was based on one of the chapters of my new upcoming book, The Entire History of Islam. An absolutely massive book dedicated to telling the entire story of our ummah. From the lost Muslim kingdoms of Spain and France to the great sultanates of Vietnam and the Philippines and Russia. This is our entire history, a compilation that has never been done before in the entire history of our ummah. This is the most important book of this generation. So go to my website now and pre-order the book. And if you pre-order the book during this Ramadan only, I will literally write your name into the book as an honor for you, so that generations from now, people will read this book and know that it was you. You were the reason that this book could even be printed in the first place. So go to my website and pre-order now. And may Allah accept you as a co-author to the most important book of our generation. Ameen.